Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jasim Azawi. Iraq floats on oil is one mantra repeated all over the Middle East. The Americans invaded Iraq to steal its oil is another. Recently, however, Iraq has signed one oil contract and several memoranda of understanding with different energy companies. While these contracts are service contracts and not the dreaded profit-sharing agreements, the question is, are they legal? With no oil law in place, what will happen to these contracts in the future? Will they be challenged by a concerned Iraqi parliament? To answer these questions and to shed some light on the current controversy surrounding the agreement signed by Iraq with energy companies, I'm delighted to welcome from Baghdad, Iraq's oil minister, Hussain al-Shahristani. Welcome to Inside Iraq. Dr. Shahristani,
well, thank you.
With no oil law in place, Parliament has not enacted that law. Why not wait until that law is enacted so everything will be under the supervision and according to the law?
The new oil and gas law has not been legislated, but this does not mean that there are no prevailing laws in the country that govern this important sector of the country, of the economy of Iraq. And the current laws that have been used in the previous regime are still valid, and until they are replaced by new legislation, those laws are still governing this sector, and all our contracts are based on those laws, which authorizes the Ministry of Oil alone to sign any oil deal, whether field development or any other sector. However, the Ministry of Oil has taken it on itself that any upstream development for the oil fields will be presented to the cabinet, and once it is approved by the cabinet, which is the highest executive authority,
before it goes to the cabinet, and before, since you mentioned the existing laws and rules, most probably you are referring to law number 97 issued in 1967. That particular law, Dr. Shahristani, stipulates that each contract needs to have a special law, it needs to have a special authorization from Parliament. And according to what I know, you did not go through Parliament. You did not seek a special permission or special authorization for whether the Rumaila contract or the Memorandum of Understandings.
Yeah, laws always are superseded by the Constitution. The current Iraqi Constitution that was voted by 80% of the Iraqi population is the supreme law of the country, and it is very clear in the Constitution that international agreements between the government of Iraq and a foreign government or treaties between Iraq and other countries, these require legislations in the parliament. Any commercial contract between an Iraqi public company and a foreign company, as is the case with the oil contracts, these are within the competency of the government, and they do not require a new legislation.
So that being the case, Dr. Hussain, I am not sure under what legislation you're operating then. Are you saying, you just said that you were working under existing rules and regulation, and I assumed it is Law 97. When I challenge that, you say it's according to the Constitution. So which way is it?
Well, first of all, there is a number of laws. It's not only one law that you have referred to. And the Constitution, I explained, is the supreme law. If any of the laws contradicts a Constitution, then the Constitution prevails. Under the Constitution, if there is a need for a new law, then that new law should be legislated. And that's what we have done. We have drafted a new hydrocarbon law. By the way, even in the new hydrocarbon law, there is no need for presenting any oil deal or contract for legislation to the Parliament. On the contrary, the new draft authorizes what is called a Federal Council for Oil and Gas to approve any contract. What we are doing now, we are presenting it to the full cabinet for approval. Whenever the
that
new
being
law
the
is going
case,
to
let
be
me take
legislated,
a case in question. The Rumaila contract, the Rumaila deal was negotiated by your ministry and was referred to the cabinet per regulations, and the cabinet in turn sent it to the legal committee, and that legal committee had 65 stipulations and question marks about this oil deal. It was referred back to the cabinet. The cabinet met for one day, and to my knowledge, those 65 questions were never answered fully, and in one day the cabinet just approved the Rumaila contract.
No, first of all, a number of the questions that were raised were simply questions, and the questions were properly answered. The Minister of Oil have sent a detailed answer on every specific question to the legal advisor of the Prime Minister, and a number of these questions have been considered by the ministry, and the contracts, the following contracts have been amended if we were convinced that this will make the contract more clearer. As a matter of fact, none of these points that were raised had any legal or economic impact on the contract at all, or technical. They were purely a matter of wordings in some cases and matter of specificity. For example, in the contract we say that if there is a delayed payment, then LABOR plus 1% interest rate will apply. Now, what the legal advisor, for example, had suggested, we should specify at what hour of the day the LABOR interest rate will be considered.
I'm sure you do understand and appreciate, Dr. Shahristani, the concern by Iraqis from all sectors of life, including the parliament, about the transparency. You yourself, at one stage, you became the champion of transparency when you challenged the legality as well as the transparency of the KRG contracts, primarily the DNO deal with the Norwegian company. As a matter of fact, that raised your stock. You became a star in all of Iraq. Here is a Shahristani. He is looking after the interest of the Iraqis. And yet now, people are saying, why is Shahristani, why the ministry are not publishing these contracts and these memorandum of understanding that you signed? I know you sent an executive summary to the cabinet, but that's all just about it.
As a matter of fact, these oil contracts has been as transparent as any process in the world could be.
Have they been referred to Parliament? Have they been sent to the Oil and Gas Committee?
I explained to you, there is no need to seek a legislation of these contracts. This is based on a constitution which is very clear on this. This is different from making a copy of the contract available. A copy of the contract is available. I can send it to you by email tomorrow. A copy is contract to any Iraqi citizen, and I invite him to come to my office and ask for a copy. It will be given to him. The contract is available to anybody. The question that you are discussing, would this contract require a legislation in the parliament? I explained to you, based on the Constitution, doesn't require a legislation.
There is another way of doing it, Dr. Hussain, and that is to ask Parliament to amend the existing law or add a new provision for this law until a new oil and gas law is enacted.
Well, we have actually written to the Parliament. We have drafted the new oil and gas law. It has been in the Parliament for 2.5 years. It has not been legislated. And the law that you are referring to again, a law cannot require that any contract should be passed by another law. A law doesn't stipulate another law. A constitution would require that a law to be passed. As far as transparency is concerned, I pride myself that the deals in the first bid round and the second bid round has been more transparent than any other deal I am aware of in any of the OPEC member countries.
Some of the information that trickled for us,
a standard of transparency.
Some of the information that trickled for us, Mr. Shahristani, I would like to share with you and seek your explanation. Prior to the first licensing round and the second licensing round, we heard energy companies, whether it's BP, Shell, CNPC, and others, they were talking about we expect $20 to $30 from each barrel from the Iraqis. And that continued for a while. Iraqis were extremely concerned. That's a huge number to ask. And now, as these service contracts and oil contracts are coming through, we are hearing that what these companies are going to get is anything between $1.15 to $2. This is really a minuscule amount energy companies going to get. To the extent somebody saying, what is the catch? Is this the reflection on the tough and clever negotiation tactics by Shahristani and his ministry, or are we missing something? What is the catch, Dr. Hussain?
Well, thank you for that question. And I would like just to clarify, you mentioned that the oil companies are going to get between $1.15 to $2 from each barrel that they produce from these fields. This is from this fee, they have to pay 35% to taxation to the government of Iraq. They have to pay 25% to the Iraqi partner with the contractor who's going to develop this particular field. So what remains for the foreign oil companies is less than 50% of that particular figure. As a matter of fact, to put it in a nutshell, the 10 contracts that has been awarded in the first and the second bid round with a total production of more than 11 million barrels a day in 6 years, the average cost that will be paid, or the average fee that will be paid to the oil company that's going to invest in the development of these fields is less than $1.90. And what actually remains for the foreign company is 89 cents only.
All the more,
so
all the more so, Dr. Hussain, what is the catch? Why
yes.
are they here for $1.19 to spend all this money? I know the contract is about 25 years, so if you project it, perhaps at the end of the line, they will make money. But yes. Are we missing something, or are you telling us exactly how it is?
Yeah, well, I'll explain to you. But I'll just mention to you, I was reading an article in one of the oil industry journals where they were advising actually the oil companies. It would have been better if the oil companies would have donated their services to Iraq rather than accepting such low fees. So the fees are extremely low. They are unprecedented in the oil industry that any oil company would accept such low fees to develop any field. And we are proud in Iraq that we have been able to protect the interest of Iraq and reach agreements with oil companies at such low levels. Again, it's worth mentioning that these are service contracts. The oil companies would not control the Iraqi oil. They will not own the Iraqi oil. They will not share the Iraqi oil because these are not production sharing. They will only be paid
Dr. Hussain.
Constant fees. Why would they accept? Simply because the world is going to depend on oil and gas as its main source of energy for the coming 2 to 3 decades.
Well understood.
All the alternative sources cannot possibly replace the need for oil and gas.
Two more questions, and that is the relationship, between the central government and the Ministry of Oil with the KRG, because that is a contentious issue. We alluded to it, with the KRG and the Ministry of Oil in Kurdistan. Will you be able to bring the entire oil and gas of Iraq under one umbrella, and that is the Ministry of Oil, through a new oil law?
Well, that is a constitutional clause that oil and gas are the property of all the Iraqi people. No region or governorate or part of the country can act on its own on behalf of all Iraqis who are jointly the owners of this wealth. And the position of the central government, the Ministry of Oil, has consistently been that all these oil deals have to be approved by the federal government, by the federal cabinet. And there are negotiations between the federal government and the government of Kurdistan to resolve these differences. And our position remains that oil deals have to be approved by the federal government of Iraq.
Yes.
Otherwise, they have no standing with Iraq.
A final question, Dr. Shahristani. You are quoted as saying that within 7 years, Iraq is projected to produce anything between 11 to 12 million barrels per day. Is this within the Iraqi interest? Is this good for Iraq? This is a huge amount of production.
No, I've not said that Iraq is going to produce 11 to 12 million barrels. What I said, Iraq's production capacity is going to reach more than 12 million barrels a day in 6 years based on these 10 contracts. Now, when you have a production capacity, then you decide what is your national interest. Of course, you'll have to look at the demand in the market and at the supply from OPEC members, from other countries, and decide how can you maximize your revenues by setting the production level and keeping the prices at reasonable level. So the production capacity is going to be 12 million barrels, but of course Iraq is going to coordinate with other producers inside OPEC and outside OPEC.
Iraq's Oil Minister Hussain al-Shahristani, thank you for being guest on Inside Iraq. And now I'm delighted to welcome from Amman, Jordan, Iraq's former Oil Minister Issam al-Chalabi. Issam, how dangerous is it for Iraq to sign these contracts and memoranda of understanding with no oil law in place?
With all due respect, Dr. Shahristani seems to be moving on a very shaky ground. I think he had fallen in his answers to question. He had fallen in a conflict between the Constitution and the existing laws. The Constitution says that the two articles about the oil and gas ought to be explained, and there will be separate law to be issued. Until then, in a very clear separate article, it says that all existing laws will remain valid. Hence, Law 97 of 1967 is valid, as he mentioned, and he ought to abide by it. That means, yes, the Ministry of Oil is authorized, provided they go and seek endorsement from the existing legislative body, which is
so far
the
they haven't done that
for each case.
Is that a reflection on the lack of oversight by Iraqi parliament about these huge and overreaching contracts?
No, the Oil and Gas Committee and many parliamentarians have sought that, and they have asked him, they have subpoenaed him, that they should look into the matter. In fact, one particular member had gone to the federal court. And you asked about the danger of these new contracts. I do say that it is very possible that in the future these contracts could very well be under questioning, and somebody could question the legitimacy of these contracts, and maybe they would be required to be amended or even annulled.
We are only 3 months away from a very crucial general elections in Iraq, and it's quite likely tremendous changes is going to happen in Iraq and the ministries, especially in the Ministry of Oil. Even the Prime Minister might not be in the saddle. Once again, will we see a rising chorus for changing these contracts or even cancelling them now that Iraqi nationalism is rising again?
Well, nobody knows what's going to happen for the elections and who will form the new government, but definitely I would say that there are a lot of question marks. There are many people who are questioning the legitimacy of these contracts, and why did he rush into it? Why didn't he wait until after the elections and go to the parliament? And also, why signing so many contracts?
But let's give the man the benefit of the doubt, Issam al-Chalabi. There is a quite likely parliament will be in loggerhead, it will be gridlock, and they will not be able to pass the law, and it will drag for another 2 or 3 years. Yeah, look on the bright side, the man negotiated a very lucrative and very cheap contract for Iraq. According to him, these energy companies, they're only going to get 89 cents per barrel.
If he is in disagreement with the existing parliament or the future parliament, that doesn't give him the right to go and sign contracts regardless. He has to abide by the Constitution and the existing laws. And as for cheap remuneration fees, yes, they are cheap, but as you mentioned in your questions, I mean, it is for 25 years and above, and we are talking about millions of barrels a day, and those companies are going to make handsome profit. And again, I still, without seeing the details of these contracts, and nobody else had seen it, none in the parliament and none outside had seen these contracts, so we have the right to question.
He has offered to send me an email with these contracts. Should I take him on his word?
I think you should, and I will. That's why I don't want to jump to any conclusion, and I think it will be for his benefit if he would open up his books to the parliament first of all, and then to oil experts who have spent tens of their years working in the industry.
Correct me if I am wrong. The projection is that we are going to have many companies or many sub-entities of the Iraqi government, almost 11 of them, to administer Iraqi oil. How is that going to play out?
I really don't know. I hate to be in his shoes or anybody's shoes for that matter, including the man in charge in South Oil Company, because all of a sudden he will find himself looking after 11 operating companies, most of them being run by international oil companies, and he has to designate his most senior staff, if he has any left, to work on those companies, and he has to make sure that all legal matter, accounting matter, and technical matters be taken care of extremely well. Otherwise, Iraq is going to be losing. Remember, these companies looking into the time factor as extremely important, and they would like to rush into making all the procurements at any price, and Iraq is going to pay every single cent and dollar that is going to be spent by these companies. So we have to wait. Then he said that he is going to increase the production capacity. Yes, but why is he going to spend that much money? Iraq is spending it. Those companies are financing it, but Iraq is paying back. So why should I have 4 or 5 million barrels a day extra capacity if I'm not going to use it? This is a problem that each OPEC member country is facing, that they have to look into the production side. Plus, he has a shortage of export outlets. He has a shortage of pipelines. So I think the ministry is not looking into the whole picture. Signing the contracts is not enough by itself.
When we talked about the Rumaila contract and the reservation the legal committee of the cabinet had, almost 65, one of them, was he convincing by pouring some cold water on these question marks?
With all due respect, again, this is not what I heard. I have in my hand the document that had been submitted within 24 hours by the legal department, by the existing legal department of the cabinet, and the cabinet immediately looked into it. The ministry did not give the proper answers, and they immediately just ignored all those points. Not all of them are simply questions. No, some of them are real technical, economical, but mostly under legal cover. And it should have taken its time. I'm not saying that all should have been addressed, but I would say that normally this will take days or weeks before you go into such a contract. The legal department was given 24 hours only to study the contract and submit its remarks.
Final question, Issam. There is a looming confrontation coming immediately after the general election, and perhaps when the new oil law is discussed, between KRG, between Masoud Barzani and his people in the north, and between the Iraqi parliament and the oil ministry about who is in charge about the oil fields and oil exploration in KRG.
Well, for that matter, I've always said it, that I am in support of the stance of the Ministry of Oil in considering itself as being the only body responsible for running the industry, and I think this is the way it should be. Definitely the region and the governorates should participate in the operation activities, but not in negotiations or signing contracts. So all those contracts need to be reviewed and referred to the ministry and to the parliament later on.
Iraq's former oil minister, Issam al-Chalabi, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq.
It's my pleasure.
To watch the show online, please go to our website, aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, have a great week.